Tonight we journey into one of North America's most disturbing secrets. 5 massive bodies of water that look peaceful from shore but hide a truth that defies common sense. The Great Lakes are deadlier than the ocean. More ships per square mile rest on their bottoms. More sailors have died in their cold embrace. More mysteries remain unsolved beneath their surfaces. And the reasons why will fundamentally change how you understand freshwater. Picture this. November 10th, 1975. A 729-foot steel freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, equipped with modern navigation, weather forecasting, and communication technology, vanishes in minutes on Lake Superior. All 29 crew perish. The vessel breaks in half and plunges to the bottom so quickly that no distress call is completed. Meanwhile, just 200 miles away in the Atlantic Ocean, vessels riding out the same storm system survive without serious incident. Steel ships built to identical standards, facing the same weather, yet the lake kills while the ocean merely challenges. This is not coincidence. This is physics, geography, and the horrifying reality of inland seas. We will explore the specific conditions that make these lakes more lethal than open oceans. We'll examine wave physics that defy intuition. We'll investigate water temperatures that kill faster than any ocean. We'll document the 6,000 to 10,000 wrecks that litter the bottom in a space smaller than most shipping lanes. We'll encounter ghost ships still sailing a century after they sank. We'll examine UFO incidents that remain classified, and we'll understand why experienced sailors, given the choice, would rather cross the Atlantic in winter than cross Lake Superior in November. If you find value in this exploration of maritime horror and natural power, please like this video, subscribe for more investigations into the unexplained and the deadly, and leave a comment sharing whether you've encountered the Great Lakes yourself and what they made you feel. Now, let us descend into cold water and colder truths. The physics of death, why lake waves kill. Stand on an ocean beach and watch the waves. They roll in with rhythm, predictable and spaced. Each wave might be large, even enormous in a storm, but they arrive in patterns. Sailors understand this rhythm. They know how to position a vessel, to ride over swells, how to time maneuvers between wave sets, how to use the ocean's own patterns for survival. The Great Lakes offer no such courtesy. Lake waves are fundamentally different in their physics, and that difference is lethal. When wind blows across water, it creates waves. The size and character of those waves depends on 3 factors: wind speed, wind duration, and fetch, which is the distance of open water the wind travels across. The oceans have effectively unlimited fetch. Wind can blow across thousands of miles of open water, and the resulting waves spread that energy over vast distances. Ocean waves are long, their crests separated by hundreds of feet. A ship climbs one side, crests the top, and descends the other side in a motion that, while potentially uncomfortable or even violent, is at least comprehensible. Lake waves form differently. The fetch is limited. Lake Superior, the largest, is only about 350 miles at its longest point. Lake Michigan is about 300 miles long. The others are smaller. Wind blowing across these distances generates waves, but those waves don't have space to spread and organize themselves. Instead, they pile up, steep and close together. Where an ocean wave might have a length from crest to crest of 500 feet or more, a lake wave might be only 50 to 100 feet from crest to crest, but nearly the same height. The result is walls of water, not rolling hills. These steep, closely spaced waves attack vessels differently than ocean swells. An ocean-going ship is designed with length in mind. Its hull is engineered to be supported by water along most of its length, perhaps suspended between 2 distant wave crests with its middle section supported by the trough. But lake waves, with their short spacing, can fit multiple crests under a vessel's length, or position a single crest directly at the ship's middle, while both bow and stern hang unsupported over troughs. This creates structural stresses ship designers never intended. The stress is called hogging, when the middle is supported and the ends hang, or sagging, when the ends are supported and the middle hangs. Steel hulls can handle this stress to a degree, but even steel has limits. Wooden hulls, common through the 1800s and into the early 1900s, had much lower tolerances. The repeated flexing in steep lake waves would open seams between planks. Water would enter faster than pumps could expel it, and the vessel would founder, sometimes in conditions that looked survivable from shore. But wave physics grows even worse. Lakes are shallow compared to oceans. Lake Superior, the deepest, reaches about 1,300 feet at its maximum depth. Lake Erie, the shallowest, averages only 62 feet deep. Compare this to ocean depths that routinely exceed 10,000 feet in shipping lanes. Shallow water affects wave behavior. As waves move into shallow water, their bottoms drag on the lake bed. This drag steepens the wave face and causes the crest to break. The way waves break when approaching a beach. In the middle of a lake, far from any visible shore, waves can be breaking as if on a beach, tumbling forward with crushing force. A vessel caught in breaking waves faces cascading water crashing onto its deck with the weight of thousands of tons. Deck structures crumple. Hatches that seemed secure are staved in. Water pours into cargo holds. The ship loses buoyancy and stability simultaneously. And because the waves are close together, another breaking crest arrives before the ship can recover from the first. Then another, a relentless battering that no hull can withstand indefinitely. The direction of these waves adds another layer of danger. In the open ocean, storm waves generally come from one direction, driven by wind that blows consistently from one quarter. A captain can position his vessel to take waves on the bow, the stern, or at an angle he chooses, maintaining some control over his situation. But the Great Lakes are enclosed and irregular in shape. Wind bounces off shores and peninsulas, creating confused seas where waves come from multiple directions simultaneously. A vessel might take one wave on the bow, the next on the beam, and the third from the stern quarter. There is no safe heading. Every angle is compromised. This wave confusion is particularly severe in the presence of islands and irregular coastlines. The waves reflect off these obstacles, bouncing back and interfering with incoming waves. The interference creates standing waves that can reach tremendous heights, far larger than either of the component waves would be independently. Sailors report rogue waves on the Great Lakes that tower above their vessels. Walls of water 30 or 40 feet high, appearing suddenly out of wave fields that were only 10 to 15 feet. These rogue waves have sunk ships in seconds. The vessel climbing the face, rolling over at the crest, and plunging upside down into the trough, never to surface. The Great Lakes offer no forgiveness for these wave conditions because there is nowhere to run. In the ocean, a captain facing dangerous wave conditions can alter course and run before the storm, traveling with the waves rather than fighting through them. He might go hundreds of miles off his intended route, but he can keep his vessel safe. On the lakes, running before a storm might give you 50 miles, perhaps 100, before you approach a shore where the waves will drive you onto rocks. You cannot run. You must either turn back to where you came from, which means putting your vessel beam to the seas during the turn, or you must continue forward and hope you can reach shelter before the waves overwhelm you. Neither option is good. Often, neither option works. Storms that strike like lightning. The second factor that makes the Great Lakes deadlier than oceans is storm development speed. Ocean storms, even severe hurricanes and typhoons, develop over days. Meteorologists track them from birth as tropical disturbances. They watch them organize and strengthen. Forecasts provide days of warning before storm-force winds arrive. Modern ships can avoid hurricanes entirely by altering course. And even in the age before satellite forecasting, ocean storms gave warning through advancing swells, characteristic cloud formations, and barometric pressure changes that occurred hours before the worst weather arrived. Great Lake storms materialize with terrifying speed. The lakes sit at the boundary between cold Canadian air masses and warmer air from the south. This boundary, the polar front, oscillates across the lakes throughout the fall, winter, and spring. When a strong cold front pushes south across warm lake water, the temperature difference creates explosive atmospheric instability. Storms don't develop, they detonate. A captain might check weather in the morning and see nothing concerning. Clear skies, moderate winds, routine conditions. He departs port and steams toward his destination. 6 hours later, the barometer plunges. The sky darkens. Wind that was 15 miles per hour an hour ago is now 50, then 60, then 70 miles per hour. Waves that were 3 feet are now 10 feet, then 15, then 20. The transition from safe to deadly occurs in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee, and there is no advance warning because the storm didn't exist 2 hours ago. It was born fully formed in the time it took the front to cross from shore to mid-lake. November is particularly notorious for this phenomenon. By late fall, the lake water retains summer heat, often staying in the 40s or even low 50s Fahrenheit, while air temperatures in Canada drop below freezing. The temperature difference of 50 degrees or more across the air-water interface creates enormous instability. Arctic air masses pushing south across this warm water generate storms of breathtaking intensity. The November Witch, or Witch of November, is not folklore. It is meteorological reality given a name by sailors who learned to fear the month. The 1913 storm, often called the White Hurricane, or the Big Blow, exemplifies this horror. On November 7th, 1913, weather across the Great Lakes was unremarkable. Vessels departed ports on routine voyages. Over the next 3 days, a complex of storm systems developed with freakish intensity. Wind speeds exceeded 90 miles per hour. Waves were measured at 35 feet, though some reports claim even higher. Blinding snow reduced visibility to 0. Temperatures plunged below freezing, causing ice to form on vessels, adding weight high on the superstructure and reducing stability. 12 large freighters sank. 31 more were driven ashore or damaged. Over 250 sailors died. Bodies washed up on beaches for weeks afterward, so badly frozen and battered that many could never be identified. Some vessels vanished so completely that even their wreck sites remained unknown for decades. The storm struck so quickly that captains who departed in reasonable weather were caught mid-lake with no possibility of return before conditions became unsurvivable. This was not a failure of seamanship. It was the lake demonstrating that it could kill faster than humans could react. Even modern forecasting cannot fully mitigate this danger. The Edmund Fitzgerald had access to weather reports that predicted gale conditions. The captain knew a storm was approaching, but the forecast predicted a normal November gale, severe but manageable. What actually developed was a storm that intensified beyond forecasts, with winds stronger and waves higher than predicted. The Fitzgerald, a modern vessel with decades of successful service, was overwhelmed. The storm outpaced the forecast, and the lake claimed another ship. This rapid intensification makes the Great Lakes more dangerous than oceans in a fundamental way. Ocean storms give time to prepare, to seek shelter, to alter plans. Lake storms give minutes or hours. By the time a captain realizes the true severity of what he faces, escape routes are already cut off. He must fight through or die trying. And sometimes, fighting through is not enough. Trapped in a bowl. No escape routes. The third deadly factor is geography. The Great Lakes are enclosed basins, bowls of water surrounded by land. This creates a strategic nightmare for any captain facing severe weather. In the open ocean, space provides options. A ship can alter course by 90 degrees or 180 degrees and steam for days in any direction. If a storm system is moving northeast, The ship goes southeast or northwest. The ocean is vast enough that course alterations can avoid danger entirely, or at least reduce exposure. The Great Lakes offer no such luxury. Every direction eventually leads to shore, and the distance to shore is measured in tens of miles, not hundreds. A captain facing dangerous conditions must make agonizing calculations. Can he turn back to his departure port before conditions worsen? The turn itself is dangerous, requiring the vessel to present its beam to the seas, the most vulnerable angle. Ships have capsized during turns, rolled over by waves striking from the side. If he successfully turns, can he outrun the storm back to port? Often the answer is no. The storm is faster. Can he continue forward to his destination? This requires pushing through the worst conditions, hoping the vessel can handle the stress until reaching shelter. But shelter might be 6 hours away, or 10, or 12. Can the ship survive that long? Are there intermediate harbors along the route? Some stretches of the Great Lakes have few harbors, and those that exist might be too shallow for large vessels or too exposed to provide actual protection. The alternative is to seek shelter against a lee shore, positioning the vessel in the protection of land blocking the wind. But lee shores are treacherous. If engines fail or anchors drag, the vessel is driven onto rocks. Many wrecks litter the supposedly safe lee sides of islands and peninsulas, ships that sought shelter only to be destroyed by the very land they hid behind. This geographic trap is compounded by the presence of shoals, islands, and narrow passages. The Straits of Mackinac connect Lake Michigan and Lake Huron through a channel only a few miles wide. Every vessel transiting between the upper and lower lakes must pass through. In a storm, this confined passage becomes a gauntlet. Waves funnel through the straits, amplified by the constriction. Currents become unpredictable. Navigation must be precise even as visibility drops to nothing and the ship is being tossed like a toy. Errors measured in hundreds of feet can mean the difference between passage and grounding on one of the many shoals that guard the straits. The Detroit River and St. Clair River, connecting Lake Huron to Lake Erie, present similar challenges. These are river passages, narrow and winding, that must be navigated regardless of weather. A vessel caught by a storm in upper Lake Huron cannot reach the shelter of Lake Erie without threading through these confined waters. In heavy weather, the task is nearly impossible. Yet the alternative is to remain exposed to Lake Huron's fury. Lake Superior presents, perhaps, the most extreme version of this geographic trap. Its northern and western shores are among the most inhospitable coastlines in North America. Rocky cliffs rise directly from deep water. Harbors are few and far between. A vessel caught in a storm on the northern side of the lake has essentially nowhere to run. The southern shore offers some harbors, but reaching them requires crossing the full width of the lake, perhaps 100 miles or more, through conditions that may be deteriorating faster than the vessel can travel. This trapped feeling, this knowledge that there is no escape route, affects decision-making in subtle but important ways. A captain knows that once he commits to a voyage, he must complete it, or survive the attempt to turn back. There is no, "I'll just go around this storm," option. This knowledge creates pressure to delay departure until conditions are perfect. But economic pressure pushes in the opposite direction. The result is captains departing in marginal conditions, gambling that they can complete the transit before those conditions deteriorate beyond survival, and too often losing that gamble. The ocean provides psychological comfort even in severe conditions. The space itself offers hope. You can run before a storm for days if necessary. You can call for help and know that rescue might come from any direction. On the Great Lakes, you are trapped in a bowl, and everyone else in the bowl faces the same conditions you do. There is no help coming. There is no escape route. There's only your ship, the storm, and the cold water waiting below. Water temperature. The 15-minute death sentence. If the waves don't kill you, if the storm doesn't sink your ship, if you somehow end up in the water wearing a life preserver, the Great Lakes will kill you anyway, and they'll do it in 15 minutes. This is the fourth factor that makes these lakes deadlier than oceans: water temperature. Lake Superior never gets warm. Even in late summer, surface temperatures might reach the 60s Fahrenheit along shallow shores. But a few miles offshore and a few dozen feet down, the water is in the 40s. In spring and fall, surface temperatures drop into the 30s and 40s. In winter, it's near freezing. This cold water is a product of depth and latitude. The lakes are far enough north that summer sun cannot heat them thoroughly, and they're deep enough that cold water remains at depth even when surfaces warm slightly. Cold water kills through hypothermia. When a human body is immersed in water below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, heat loss begins to outpace heat generation. Below 60 degrees, the loss is rapid. Below 50 degrees, it's catastrophic. In 40-degree water, which is typical for the Great Lakes, an average person will lose consciousness from hypothermia in 15 to 30 minutes. Death follows shortly after. Even in a life jacket, even as a strong swimmer, even knowing rescue is coming, you will be dead before that rescue arrives if it takes more than 20 minutes to reach you. Compare this to ocean temperatures. The Gulf Stream and other warm currents keep Atlantic shipping lanes in the 50s and 60s even in winter, warmer in summer. Pacific shipping lanes range from the 50s in the north to the 70s and 80s in tropical zones. A person in 60-degree water can survive for hours. In 70-degree water, survival time extends to many hours or even days with a life jacket. This difference is the gap between certain death and possible rescue. The cold water also affects survival behavior. In water below 50 degrees, the shock of immersion causes involuntary gasping. If your head is underwater when you gasp, you inhale water and drown immediately. If your head is above water, the gasping causes hyperventilation, which can lead to panic, which increases energy expenditure, which accelerates heat loss. The cold also causes rapid loss of manual dexterity. Your fingers stop working within minutes. You cannot grasp a rescue line. You cannot hold onto wreckage. You cannot zip a survival suit even if you have one. Your body betrays you, shutting down motor function in a desperate attempt to preserve core temperature. The Great Lakes' cold water also preserves. This is a disturbing reality we'll explore more deeply in the next section, but it's worth noting here. Bodies that sink in cold freshwater don't decompose in the normal way. Decomposition requires bacterial action, and bacteria work slowly in cold water. Bodies remain intact, preserved in the cold darkness, sometimes for decades. Divers exploring wrecks report seeing drowned sailors still at their posts, their features recognizable, their clothing intact, frozen in the moment of death. The cold water that killed them also preserved them, creating underwater graveyards where the dead remain on eternal duty. This preservation effect has a psychological impact on those who work the lakes. Ocean sailors know that bodies lost at sea vanish, consumed by marine life and decomposition within days or weeks. Lake sailors know that bodies lost in their waters remain, preserved, and waiting. The lakes keep what they take. This knowledge adds a layer of existential horror to the physical danger. You're not just risking death. You're risking eternal preservation in cold darkness. Your corpse, an exhibit for future divers, frozen in your final moments forever. The combination of rapid hypothermia and preservation creates a grim calculus. Rescue operations on the Great Lakes are often recovery operations. When a vessel sinks in November and crew members end up in the water, the assumption is that they're already dead by the time rescuers arrive. The focus shifts from rescue to recovery, and even recovery is often deferred because the cold water has preserved the bodies. They'll still be there next spring, next year, next decade. The urgency that drives ocean rescues doesn't exist in the same way on the Great Lakes. The cold water has already done its work. The wreck count, an underwater graveyard. The evidence of the Great Lakes' deadliness lies on the bottom. Conservative estimates place the number of wrecks at 6,000. Some researchers believe the true number exceeds 10,000 when accounting for small vessels, barges, and wrecks not yet documented. This is an astonishing concentration. The Great Lakes represent about 94,000 square miles of surface area. The Atlantic Ocean is about 41 million square miles. If the Atlantic had the same wreck density as the Great Lakes, it would contain over 2.6 million wrecks. It doesn't. Not remotely close. The Great Lakes wreck concentration results from several factors. First, the lakes have been used for commerce for over 2 centuries, and early vessels were fragile wooden constructions vulnerable to the conditions we've discussed. Second, the enclosed nature of the lakes means wrecks don't drift away on currents. They sink where they die and stay there. Third, the cold fresh water preserves wrecks so perfectly that wooden vessels from the 1800s can still be identified and explored, their structures intact. And fourth, the lakes are simply more deadly per mile traveled than the ocean. Some wrecks are famous. The Edmund Fitzgerald is the most well-known, immortalized in song and countless documentaries. It sank November 10th, 1975, in a Lake Superior storm. All 29 crew died. The wreck lies in 530 feet of water, broken in 2 pieces. Underwater surveys show the bow section upright and intact. The stern section is heavily damaged. The wreck site is a grave site, and diving it is restricted to protect the remains of the crew still entombed within. The Carl D. Bradley sank in Lake Michigan in 1958, breaking in 2 pieces during a November gale. It was the largest ship on the Great Lakes at the time, 639 feet long. Of the 35 crew, only 2 survived, rescued after clinging to a life raft for hours in freezing water. Their survival is considered miraculous. The 33 who died are still with the wreck in cold darkness. The Eastland never left the dock, but its story is uniquely horrifying. In 1915, the passenger steamer was tied to a Chicago dock, loading passengers for an excursion, when it rolled over without warning. Water poured into the hull through open gangways and portholes. People were trapped inside. Others were crushed between the hull and the dock. 844 people died, most of them women and children. It remains the deadliest disaster on the Great Lakes by death toll, and it happened in calm water at the dock, a testament to the instability issues that plagued lake vessel design. But most wrecks are not famous. They are statistics. A schooner that foundered in an 1875 gale off the Keweenaw Peninsula with 6 crew. A steamer that vanished in fog on Lake Huron in 1892. A barge that broke loose from its tow and went down with 2 watchmen in 1901. The list extends for pages, each entry representing lives lost and families broken, collectively painting a picture of waters that take and take and take. The distribution of wrecks across the lakes tells its own story. Lake Superior has perhaps 350 to 400 documented wrecks, despite being the least trafficked of the lakes historically. Its extreme conditions create a high casualty rate per voyage. Lake Huron contains perhaps 1,000 to 1,200 wrecks, many concentrated in the straits and along the rocky eastern shore. Lake Michigan holds 1,500 or more, many from the heavily trafficked Chicago and Milwaukee routes. Lake Erie, despite being the shallowest and smallest, contains well over 2,000 wrecks in its western and central basins, a result of centuries of commerce and violent conditions in shallow water. Lake Ontario has perhaps 800 to 1,000, many from the War of 1812 and early commercial traffic. These wrecks create diving destinations. The clear, cold water of the Great Lakes makes them some of the best wreck diving in the world. Divers can explore wooden schooners from the 1800s that look like they sank last year. Artifacts remain in place. Dishes in the galley, tools in the engine room, personal effects in crew quarters. Is like diving into a time capsule, except the time capsule is a tomb. But wreck diving on the Great Lakes is also dangerous. The cold water that preserves wrecks also kills divers. Hypothermia is a constant risk. Nitrogen narcosis, a disorienting effect of breathing compressed air at depth, sets in more severely in cold water, and the wrecks themselves present entanglement hazards. Divers have died exploring Great Lakes wrecks, their bodies sometimes not recovered for days or weeks, occasionally not recovered at all, becoming permanent additions to the underwater graveyard. Ghost ships, vessels that sailed beyond death. The Great Lakes have a peculiar reputation in maritime lore. They are haunted. Ghost ship sightings are reported with unusual frequency. Some can be dismissed as folklore or misidentification, but others are harder to explain, particularly the cases of vessels found drifting with no crew, meals still warm on the table, no sign of what caused the entire complement of men to vanish. The ghost ship phenomenon takes several forms. The most common is sightings of vessels that are known to have sunk, reported by credible witnesses who describe the ship in accurate detail despite having no knowledge of what it looked like. The Bannockburn is perhaps the most famous of these. A 245-foot freighter carrying grain from Port Arthur to Kingston, it vanished without trace in November 1902. All 20 crew were lost. The wreck has never been found despite decades of searching. Yet the Bannockburn continues to be sighted. Sailors on Lake Superior report seeing a vessel matching its description, usually in fog or at dusk, sailing on a course toward what would have been its destination. The sightings are detailed enough to identify the vessel's profile, but when approached, the ship vanishes. Sometimes it fades into fog. Sometimes it simply isn't there when the witness looks away and then looks back. The sightings have continued for over a century, reported by sailors, with no obvious reason to fabricate such stories, and often unaware of the ship's history until they report what they saw and researchers identify it. The Griffin holds the distinction of being the first ship lost on the upper Great Lakes and one of the most enduring mysteries. Built by French explorers in 1679, it sailed from the Niagara area into Lake Erie, through Lake Huron, and into Lake Michigan. It loaded a cargo of furs and departed for the return journey. It was never seen again. No wreck has been definitively identified as the Griffin, despite numerous claims over the years. Its fate remains unknown after more than 340 years. The Griffin, too, is reported as a ghost ship. Sightings describe a small sailing vessel of a type not seen on the lakes in centuries, appearing in fog or storms, sometimes close enough that witnesses report seeing figures on deck, men in clothing from another era. The ship is always sailing, never at anchor or distressed, moving with purpose toward an unknown destination. Then it vanishes. More disturbing than sightings of known wrecks are the vessels found drifting with crews vanished. The most famous ocean example is the Mary Celeste, but the Great Lakes have their own versions. Ships discovered under sail or power moving steadily, with no one aboard, the galley stove still warm, food prepared but not eaten, personal effects undisturbed, lifeboats still secured to the davits, and every human being gone without explanation, without distress signals, without any indication of what caused an entire crew to abandon a vessel that showed no sign of sinking or damage. These cases are rare but documented. The speculation ranges from rogue waves that swept everyone overboard simultaneously to collective hallucinations or panic from carbon monoxide or other gas leaks. But the speculation is unsatisfying because it requires explaining why experienced sailors would abandon a perfectly functional vessel without taking time to send distress signals, launch lifeboats properly, or grab personal effects. The abandoned ships suggest not evacuation, but vanishing, as if the crews ceased to exist mid-task. Voices in the fog represent another category of haunting. Sailors on night watches or navigating in poor visibility report hearing voices calling from the water. The voices sound like men shouting for help, sometimes calling out names, sometimes just wordless cries. Searchlights sweep across the water and find nothing. The voices continue, always seeming to come from just beyond where light or sight can reach. When the fog clears or dawn breaks, the voices stop. Nothing is ever found. These reports cluster around known wreck sites. The voices are heard most frequently in areas where ships went down with all hands, where sailors died calling for help that never came. The skeptical explanation is acoustic anomalies, fog distorting and carrying sounds from distant sources. But the sailors who report these voices, experienced men not given to fancy or superstition, describe them with unsettling certainty. They know what they heard. They know it came from the water, and they know no one living could have been making those sounds in those locations. The psychological explanation for ghost ships and haunting is straightforward. Sailors work in dangerous conditions that produce stress and fear. Their minds, primed by stories and folklore, interpret ambiguous stimuli as supernatural. A distant vessel in fog is misidentified as a ship known to be wrecked. Wind through ship's rigging sounds like voices. Memory fills in details that weren't actually observed. This explanation is probably correct for many sightings, but it doesn't explain all of them. It doesn't explain the empty vessels found drifting with their crews gone. It doesn't explain the consistency of descriptions across witnesses who have no contact with each other and no knowledge of what they should be seeing. And it doesn't explain why the Great Lakes have a substantially higher rate of such reports than the oceans, where sailors face equal or greater stress and have equal exposure to maritime folklore. Perhaps the lakes are simply more haunted. Perhaps the cold water that preserves bodies and wrecks also preserves something else, some echo of the moment of death, replaying for those unlucky enough to be in the right place at the wrong time. Or perhaps the isolation, the enclosed nature of the lakes, the concentration of tragedy in a relatively small space, creates conditions where the boundary between past and present grows thin. Whatever the explanation, the ghost ships of the Great Lakes remain part of their deadly reputation, a reminder that these waters hold secrets that defy easy explanation. UFOs and anomalies, the Lake Michigan Triangle. If ghost ships weren't enough, the Great Lakes also boast their own version of the Bermuda Triangle, centered on Lake Michigan. The Lake Michigan Triangle is a region roughly bounded by Ludington, Michigan, on the east shore, Benton Harbor, Michigan, on the southeast shore, and extending out into the lake. Within this region, vessels and aircraft have vanished, unexplained lights and objects have been sighted, and electromagnetic anomalies have been documented. The most famous case is the disappearance of Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 2501, on June 23, 1950. The DC-4 aircraft was flying from New York to Minneapolis with a scheduled stop in Chicago. Approaching Lake Michigan at night, the pilot requested permission to descend from his assigned altitude due to electrical storms. Shortly after, contact was lost. The aircraft vanished. Wreckage and bodies washed ashore over the following days, but the main wreckage was never found, despite extensive searches. All 58 people aboard died. What makes this case anomalous is not just the disappearance, but witness reports. Multiple people on the ground reported seeing a strange light in the sky at the approximate time and location of the disappearance. Some described it as a fireball. Others described it as a light that moved with unusual speed and changed direction in ways that didn't match an aircraft in distress. Theories have ranged from mid-air collision with another aircraft, none were reported missing, to catastrophic structural failure, the aircraft was well maintained, to something stranger. The disappearance of the schooner Thomas Hume in 1891 is another triangle case. The vessel departed Chicago with a load of lumber, bound for Muskegon. It never arrived. No wreckage was ever found. No crew bodies recovered. The weather at the time was not severe enough to explain a total loss without trace. The Hume simply vanished, as completely as if it had sailed off the edge of the world. The wreck site remains unknown despite over 130 years of searching. The Rosa Belle vanished in 1921 while traveling from Chicago to Benton Harbor. Again, calm weather. Again, no trace ever found. The captain and his crew gone without explanation. The vessel was small enough that it might have capsized suddenly, but the lake was calm and the weather good. There should have been wreckage, at least, or some indication of what happened. There was nothing. UFO sightings cluster in the Triangle area with unusual frequency. Reports describe lights moving underwater at high speeds, objects emerging from the water and ascending into the sky, and metallic craft hovering over the lake before vanishing. The 1965 incident is particularly well documented. Multiple witnesses, including police officers in separate locations, reported seeing a metallic object streak across the sky and plunge into Lake Michigan near Duluth. The object created a disturbance in the water consistent with impact. Navy and Coast Guard vessels searched the area extensively. Nothing was found. Requests for information about Navy involvement have been met with classified status responses, fueling speculation about what was actually recovered and then concealed. Divers and sailors report electromagnetic anomalies in certain areas of Lake Michigan. Compasses spin wildly. Electronic equipment malfunctions. Depth sounders give impossible readings, showing bottom depths that change by hundreds of feet within seconds, despite traveling over areas known to be flat. Some witnesses report feelings of disorientation or time loss, realizing that hours have passed when it seemed like only minutes, or that they have traveled much farther or less far than their speed and elapsed time should allow. Skeptics point out that the Great Lakes, like any heavily traveled region, will accumulate disappearances and anomalies over time simply by statistical chance. They note that triangles are defined after the fact, drawn to include incidents while excluding areas where nothing unusual happened. They suggest that electromagnetic anomalies might result from unusual mineral deposits on the lake bottom or from underwater geological features that affect instruments. These skeptical explanations are reasonable and probably account for some incidents, but they struggle to explain the sheer concentration of events in this particular area compared to other parts of the lakes. They don't explain the specific witness accounts of objects behaving in ways that don't match known aircraft or vessels, and they don't explain the military response and classification surrounding certain incidents, particularly the 1965 object recovery. What makes the Lake Michigan Triangle particularly eerie is that it combines multiple forms of anomaly. Vessels vanish, aircraft vanish, unexplained objects are sighted, electromagnetic effects occur, witness reports describe time distortions. It's as if this particular stretch of water is a thin place, where the normal rules don't always apply, where things happen that resist conventional explanation. Whether this represents genuine paranormal activity, undiscovered geological or atmospheric phenomena, secret military operations, or simply the human tendency to find patterns in randomness, remains unresolved. What's certain is that the triangle adds another layer to the Great Lakes' reputation as waters, where the impossible becomes merely unlikely, and the unlikely becomes routine. Why oceans are actually safer. Given everything we've explored, we can now articulate clearly why oceans are safer than the Great Lakes despite their vastly larger size and exposure to hurricanes and typhoons. The comparison seems counterintuitive. Oceans are massive. They generate storms of continental scale. They contain predators and hazards that lakes lack. Yet, statistically and practically, ocean shipping is safer. First, saltwater provides more buoyancy than freshwater. The salt content increases water density, making vessels float higher and more stably. The difference is not enormous in absolute terms, but in marginal situations it matters. A vessel riding slightly higher in saltwater has slightly more freeboard, meaning waves are slightly less likely to break over the deck. In heavy weather, those slight differences compound into meaningful improvements in survival probability. Second, saltwater's density also affects survivors in the water. A person or object floats more easily in saltwater than freshwater. Life jackets are more effective. Wreckage provides more buoyancy. Survivors can stay afloat with less effort, conserving energy and delaying hypothermia. This doesn't prevent death in cold saltwater, but it extends survival time, improving rescue chances. Third, ocean weather is more predictable across longer time frames. Hurricane season is known. Storm tracks follow understood patterns. Weather systems develop over days, moving across thousands of miles, while being tracked continuously. Modern forecasting can predict the path of an Atlantic hurricane 3 to 5 days in advance with reasonable accuracy. Even before satellite forecasting, hurricanes gave warning through advancing swells that could be detected a day or more before the storm arrived. Ocean sailors have time to prepare, time to alter course, time to seek shelter. Great Lakes storms, as we've discussed, develop with minimal warning. The microclimates of the lakes create localized violence that can materialize in hours. No amount of modern forecasting can predict with certainty when a November cold, front-crossing Lake Superior will generate a deadly gale versus a routine blow. The forecasts speak in probabilities and generalizations that don't capture the specific moment when conditions exceed a particular vessel's capability. Fourth, the ocean's vastness provides strategic options. A ship can run before a storm for days, traveling hundreds or thousands of miles to avoid the worst conditions. The captain can alter course in any direction, choosing his angle to the weather based on his vessel's capabilities and the storm's movement. This freedom of maneuver is itself a form of safety. Even if caught in bad weather, the space allows tactics that lakes don't permit. Fifth, ocean water temperature, while cold in many regions, is generally warmer than the Great Lakes and shipping lanes where most traffic occurs. The Gulf Stream, Kuroshio Current, and other warm currents moderate temperatures along major routes. Water in the 50s, 60s, or even 70s provides survival times measured in hours or days rather than minutes. This difference transforms rescue operations from recovery missions to genuine life-saving efforts. Sixth, the ocean's depth means wave behavior follows deep-water physics. Waves are longer and more regular. They don't steepen as dramatically as lake waves, except in storm conditions, far more severe than typical lake gales. Ocean waves can be enormous, but they're comprehensible. Ships are designed specifically for ocean wave patterns. The design assumptions match the environment. Seventh, ocean shipping lanes are patrolled and monitored more extensively than lake routes. International agreements mandate certain safety measures. Coast guards from multiple nations coordinate rescue operations. Satellite communication means distress calls are received instantly. Aircraft can be dispatched for search and rescue. The infrastructure supporting ocean shipping is vast and redundant. The Great Lakes, while patrolled by the Coast Guard, represent a smaller operational area with fewer resources distributed across 5 separate bodies of water. Rescue response times, while generally good, cannot match the instantaneous global coordination available for ocean shipping. And in the worst weather, when rescues are most needed, Coast Guard vessels on the lakes face the same conditions that threaten the ships they're trying to save. Finally, ocean shipping benefits from international standards developed over centuries of global commerce. Vessel construction, safety equipment, crew training, and operational procedures reflect hard-won lessons from maritime disasters worldwide. The Great Lakes shipping industry, while professional and generally safe, operates under somewhat different standards and faces conditions that ocean-going vessels rarely encounter. The assumption that lake shipping is inherently safer because it's fresh water and close to land is itself dangerous, creating complacency about conditions that require equal or greater respect than ocean voyaging. The bodies that remain. We must confront the most disturbing aspect of the Great Lakes' deadliness, the bodies. When people die in the lakes, they often stay there, preserved in cold darkness, resting in wrecks or on the bottom, essentially unchanged by time. The cold freshwater creates conditions unlike any ocean, conditions where decomposition slows to near stasis. Bodies that sank in 1920 look largely as they did when they died. Bodies from the 1800s, while more deteriorated, remain recognizable. The lakes are not just graveyards, they are mausoleums. Divers, exploring the Edmund Fitzgerald wreck report, seeing crew members still at their stations. The cold water and depth have preserved them. Their clothes, their positions, even facial features remain. The divers describe the experience as profoundly disturbing, like intruding on a moment frozen in time, a moment of death that never fully ended. The crew didn't die and return to nature. They died and remained suspended, waiting. Other wrecks tell similar stories. Wooden schooners from the 1890s contain the preserved remains of sailors who died when the vessel foundered. Their bodies rested in the cold darkness for over a century, intact enough that when discovered, they could be identified as human, as individuals, not as abstract casualties. The preservation extends to personal effects. Photographs, letters, clothing, all retained in the anoxic environment of the deep cold water. This preservation has scientific value. Researchers studying historical vessels gain insights impossible in saltwater environments where shipworm and marine organisms consume wooden wrecks within decades. The Great Lakes preserve history in 3 dimensions, offering underwater museums of maritime technology and practice. But the preservation also means living with the knowledge that thousands of bodies remain below, entombed in ships, lying on lake bottoms, preserved indefinitely. The ethical questions around this preservation are complex. Should wrecks be treated as grave sites, protected from diving and disturbance? Many are. Access to wrecks like the Edmund Fitzgerald is restricted, and removing artifacts is prohibited. But other wrecks are open to recreational diving. Divers can swim through cargo holds where sailors died, can touch artifacts those sailors used, can see the preserved remains if they're present and visible. Is this respectful exploration or macabre tourism? Families of the deceased face particular anguish. Their loved ones are not buried. They're not cremated. They remain below, in specific locations, preserved in the condition they were at death. Some families find comfort in this, a sense that their loved one remains rather than being erased. Others find it horrifying, the idea of a preserved corpse lying in darkness forever. The lakes offer no choice in the matter. They keep what they take. Recovery of bodies from depth is technically challenging and expensive. Deep wrecks require specialized equipment and divers trained for extreme conditions. The cost can reach tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. In many cases, families cannot afford recovery. In some cases, authorities deem it too dangerous to attempt. The bodies remain not by choice, but by practicality. The lakes win by default. This preservation also affects those who work the lakes. Sailors know that if they die out there, they might become permanent fixtures, underwater exhibits for future divers, their death moment eternally accessible. This knowledge adds psychological weight to the physical danger. You're not just risking death. You're risking a specific kind of afterlife, frozen and displayed, your final moments on view for anyone curious or brave enough to dive down and look. The Great Lakes' preservation of human remains is unique in freshwater environments of their size and the extent to which they've been explored and documented. Other lakes preserve bodies, but none combine the size, the traffic, the wreck count, and the diving accessibility of the Great Lakes. They are humanity's largest underwater mausoleum, holding thousands of the dead in cold, perfect stasis, a grim testament to the water's deadliness and to the price paid for 2 centuries of commerce on waters that never forgive mistakes. Conclusion: respect the inland seas. We've journeyed through the reasons why the Great Lakes are deadlier than the ocean. We've examined wave physics that creates steep walls of water impossible in deep seas. We've explored storm development so rapid that vessels have no time to seek shelter. We've mapped the geographic trap of enclosed basins where there's no escape route when conditions deteriorate. We've confronted water temperature that kills in 15 minutes, making rescue operations into recovery missions. We've documented thousands of wrecks littering the bottom in concentrations that exceed ocean shipping lanes. We've encountered ghost ships that sail on long after sinking, voices that call from empty water, and disappearances that defy explanation. And we've faced the disturbing reality of cold preservation, bodies that remain in dark water for decades or centuries, frozen monuments to the lake's power. The Great Lakes are not gentle. They are inland seas, and that term is not poetic license. They generate weather, create waves, and kill with efficiency that rivals any ocean. The difference is that they look safe. They look like lakes, standing on shore on a calm day, watching small waves lap at beaches. It's easy to forget that 20 miles offshore, conditions might be entirely different. It's easy to assume that fresh water means safety, that proximity to land means rescue is possible, that modern technology has eliminated the danger. All these assumptions are wrong. The sailors who work these waters know. They carry the knowledge in their bodies, in the tension they feel when barometers drop in November, in the calculations they make about whether to depart or wait, in the stories they tell in port about the wrecks they've seen and the sailors they've known who didn't come back. The families in port cities know, carrying the generational memory of fathers and sons and husbands who went out on the lakes and never returned. The divers know, descending into cold darkness to find vessels perfectly preserved and bodies still at their stations. And now you know. The Great Lakes have earned their reputation not through exaggeration or folklore, but through the steady accumulation of death across 2 centuries. They have earned it through physics that creates unforgiving wave conditions, through geography that traps vessels in bowls of violence, through water temperature that kills faster than rescue can arrive, through storms that materialize with no warning and intensify beyond prediction. They've earned it through the 6,000 to 10,000 wrecks on their bottoms, through the thousands of sailors who died in cold water, calling for help that never came, through the bodies that remain preserved in eternal testimony to the water's power. If you take one thing from this exploration, let it be respect. If you boat on these lakes, respect their power. Check weather obsessively. Don't venture out in marginal conditions. Wear proper cold water protection. File float plans, carry communication equipment, understand that conditions can change in minutes and that you might not be able to return to shore before those changes become lethal. If you dive these wrecks, respect them as grave sites. Remember that those preserved vessels and preserved bodies represent real people who died real deaths. If you simply live near these waters or visit them, respect their beauty. But remember what lies beneath, cold, dark, and waiting. The Great Lakes are deadlier than the ocean. This is not opinion. This is fact, demonstrated by statistics, by physics, by 2 centuries of maritime tragedy. They are beautiful, they are majestic, and they are absolutely merciless. Respect them. Thank you for joining this exploration into the deadly reality of the Great Lakes. If you found this valuable, please like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into maritime mysteries and natural phenomena, and leave a comment sharing your own experiences with these waters or your thoughts on what we've covered. The stories we've explored are warnings written in shipwrecks and preserved in cold water. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be understood. And they deserve to shape how we approach these magnificent, terrible waters. Safe harbor to you all.